we're going over the module of bubble building. Okay, so we're going to do 3 acts here. The first act will kind of be just briefly talking about what bubbles are, what are bubbles, and then how does it relate to people pools.
Okay.
So that's what we're connecting here. And then act 3 is basically, in case I forget, is why is this important? And puncture and pipeline / demassification, how does it relate to that? The act 2 is basically going to be bubble increments, specifically related to people pools. Bubbles are basically anything that creates a continuum or a contiguous amount of energy. This does not have to be physically contiguous, and that's what makes bubbles so tricky but also so powerful. Because if you are reading a book, for example, both ladies here, avid readers, when you're reading a good book, then actually the mojo of the writer and the various stories going on, motifs, creates a little bubble, and you're in it while you read it. For example, let's say you're out and about and the day is lame, it's boring, it's not going so great, whatever. You can just pull out the book and you can kind of, boom, bubble on. So right there is a classic example of a bubble. It's just you in a book, but you have created like a little alternate reality thing there. And that's a basic concept of bubbles, is they are a continuation of everything is energy evolving. Sort of like a follow-up to that basic premise is that since everything is energy evolving, you basically have stuff doing this. That's my little witty thought for the day. But basically, my witty visual, but basically they're like bubbles. And if you look at an ocean, it's all bubbles. Inside an ocean, you may see tidal waves, you may see tsunamis, you may see deep currents underwater, deep down by, like, you know, the bottom of the ocean. It doesn't look like there are bubbles. There's always bubbles. In fact, the only difference if you study water in the oceans is the size of the bubbles. That's really the only question, because it is all bubbles. They just look dramatically different. And the crucial element of this is, and this is why it's important to note this, that means the entire thing's contiguous. Every single bubble in our ocean connects to every single other bubble. So you're just having bubbles bump into other bubbles, be swallowed by bubbles, or swallow other bubbles, just like how planets and suns are made. That's all that's happening out there, because it's not really like the sun and the planets and then empty. It's actually the sun, the planets, and then like asteroids, meteorites, small rocks, pebbles, dust, and they're all bubbles. And may the strongest bubbles win is basically, if you study, you know, cosmology, you learn pretty quick, you know, big bubbles win. If they know how to continue to increase their size without losing structural integrity. And how this relates to people pools. Well, obviously we're bringing this into the context of humans and how they understand existence. That's one thing that makes it very important. But also that you're going on the higher end of bubble building in that you're talking about things that are going to be very intangible, almost spirit forming. Because, for example, like the energy the three of us are having right now, how do you define that? Even when we finally are able to map this with digital technology, it'll take a computer to do that. Humans aren't actually able to see like all these pings going back and forth and a swirl and all that's going on, but it's there. For example, she was having not such a great day because of various things of, you know, memes. But now she's around us and up she goes. Now, she didn't eat anything else. This is the power of bubbles. No food changes. Nothing is physically touched. For example, team camaraderie. If you're in the team, on the field, in the team, like, no one's actually allowed to eat or anything, or doing, I mean, no one's actually getting any tangible pipeline of energy. So you can't see the power growing. But that's what makes it so cool. People pools are basically intangible power, which, if you've noticed some of our other filmings, we don't tend to care too much about the bubbles that most people find themselves in, and that's because they're weak bubbles. They're not doing a good job, but that doesn't mean bubbles are bad. We beat up on the mean bubbles so much because they suck so much ass, because they should be doing something correctly, which is bubble building, but they fail so often. Okay, so before we get to Act 2, this is the segue, is bubble building. I'm not going to get into the overall aspects of bubble building because that covers everything. I'm simply going to talk about the general concept real quickly, which I did, and now I'm going to give a specific example, which is people pool bubble building. But That example is, as I mentioned, probably the most advanced, sophisticated kind of bubbles being built in the cosmos we know of. Humans are the most advanced thing. Our pod power technology is the most advanced part about us, and bubbles are actually the spells that those things create. So this is basically the most sophisticated bubbles being learned. If you get this, it's not like the elevator of enlightenment. If you get that, you can figure out all the other spirit forms through that. So same thing, if you get how people build bubbles through mojo, like social alchemy and tangible stuff, then like, you know, other stuff like, you know, crowd control, noise, touching other people, how continents touch one another, the cosmology, that's like a no-brainer. So we're starting at the top and work our way down as a plan. Now we're going to get into people pool bubble building. And the first bubble is you. There are 20 gradations that you're going to want to become familiar with, and that is going to make up pretty much the bulk of this, or the entirety of this Act 2. Is I'm going to go through these 20 gradations. The first gradation size, bubble size. I don't say bubble size, but it's understandable that bubbles can mean all kinds of things, different spheres, and I'm now talking about people pools, but I'm now just going to say bubbles. So you start with being a bubble of 1. You are the first unit in this metaphor. Now, it's important to understand, however, that that single bubble is actually made up of many constituent parts, so that that bubble can be of a lesser, greater strength. And it's important to note that we're taking now the concepts of knowing your peak pathway and things like that, and translating that into adding yourself with others who are doing the same thing and what you can do with it. This is where you see like the big like global scale power that pod layers may bring in. Is like, once you can read, then you can know mojo. Once you know mojo, you know social alchemy, and now you can start stacking. So this is what we're talking about stacking social alchemy. But that starts with making yourself, kind of like a Lego, stackable. You're designed to work with the collective, but most of us are fucking it up horribly. Just we're not really well formatted. We've actually messed ourselves up, and so we don't clump up well. It's kind of like, I think they mentioned this, I don't know technical stuff, but like in, you know, physics, particle physics, things like this, you can have different elements like electrons, protons, things like this, and things even smaller, and they're supposed to go together. But you can actually have, you know, you can have like sick people. You can have sick electrons. They can get warped. Different processes can warp them, and then they won't go together. Like, you can do things to like hydrogen or oxygen singularly that warps them, and then when you take them and put them with the H to the O, water is not made. Water is not made. It's supposed to. You know what I mean? The hydrogen plus the oxygen, you put them together with reasonable amount of force or proximity, it's supposed to make water. But you can do things to those elements that denatures them. You denature the basic compounds, and then they don't make the basic next building block they're supposed to make. So it starts with being a bubble of 1. So for me, I'm an IG. I'm supposed to stack up, let's say right off the bat, with, say, a Nijai. As we've mentioned repeatedly, and lots of IG, forget getting down to like social alchemies like 18, 19, 20. They actually can groove with strong members of their own mojo or strong members of their inspirational. Like right out of the gate, like they actually are not. They have to develop themselves what they're built to do in order to actually magnetically link up stories. Your storyline has a magnetic pull like a planet, and the stronger you're pumping out your story, you will magnetically clump up with other heroes. You'll make heroic larger molecules, but not if you even like ionize wrong or something. I mean, you can actually do it wrong, and then you don't work like you're supposed to. Okay, so the first bubble is having your storyline up, which means you have your conscious power strong, and you have a strong connection, which equals desire, magnetic desire for your other. That instantly makes you able to interface with some molecules, not all of them. All molecules in this analogy would be all the mojos. But you should be able to instantly groove with your own mojo. If not, get to it, because you're not going to be able to build off of that. That's a lot of Naiji, for example, with Fozen, think they're stronger, but they're not, because, just to be honest with you, you look weak. Strong Ni Alpha will not pair up with you. You bring their game down. Does that bother you? Then sorry, you're weak, and weak, I don't want to pair up with you. I'm very strong on my own, so I want to pair up with other strong things. That's human nature. Now, what's strong? That depends on storyline. So if I do my storyline very well, the first thing they should recognize me would be other Naiji. They would recognize, like, especially male Naiji, like, oh, he's strong. If I do that right, instantly I'm be working into the Nijai going, that's how it's supposed to be done. The more you're doing your story like you're supposed to be, the more you like radiate that magnetic pole to other particles in the suit that are the stuff you need to get bigger, properly bigger. So that's the first part. Number two, so that's what I'm called, we have a word for that, which is the solo gradation. And the reason why it's said it's solo is when you think solo, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Whether you know it or not. Mission. It's applied. Solo doing what? If you're just by yourself, don't people usually say you're alone? It's a semantic thing. They say you're alone, they don't say you're going solo. Going solo means you're doing something. So that's the first part of being your own bubble, or the bubble of one, the army of one, is that, sorry, well, cheesiness there. So this gets a lot to people who are bothered perhaps by the way I'm approaching things out of the gate, but just so you know, I'm a winner. I've been winning my whole life. I know what I'm doing. I'm way ahead of the whole curve. So the question is how to actually get the next thing. Believe it or not, you have to show yourself. This takes balls, I'm sorry, men and women, this takes a nerve. You actually have to announce what you want. It's like basic negotiations for getting a raise. You have to say what you want. If you don't tell your employer, I want more money, I think I'm worth more money, you're not going to get it. Or at least not anywhere at the time scale you should be getting it at. It won't happen that way. So you have to say, I'm an IG. When you do that, you're going to get hit by the environment. Know that. I'm sorry, the scientific spirituality index means that certain bubble building is more difficult. So in the beginning, when you announce yourself as a Nijai or a Naiji to the environment, you will get hit. You have to take that. Because it's going to announce yourself to, in this case, the other Nijes. The other Nijes will notice when you're being super buoyant, when you're actually being angry at the status quo, to the point that most people are like, can't you just tone that down? You could, but you would not find the other Nijai or Naiji. Your storyline, when you crank it up, it bothers some people. That's important. Your storyline is going to bother some mojos a little bit because of the mathematics, and almost all mojo if the memes are fucked up, which they are. So if you start cranking out a correct mojo story loud, it's going to cause a lot of static. But you got to think of yourself like a guerrilla radio station. You have to do that, or the other ones, and there are other ones you can stack with, they won't find you. They won't find you, and if they did come by you, they would not recognize you. You didn't show yourself actually as being what you are. So they walked on by you, and they kept on looking for a heroic particle they could have linked up with, a heroic bubble they could have connected with. You can be two people by yourself, or two people, but we say partners. Why? Because there's purpose. With solo, your purpose is to do your choreography. Now we're getting how, you kind of know a little bit, but I'm saying it in certain ways so you can see how it can be stacked now. You start bringing in a second person, there is the concept, and it's crucial to this, of the group choreography. So for example, right now the three of us, we're all Hem, Her, and Nijes. So actually by expanding out to that way of looking at things, we can actually have one story. Now within that, all three of us have our own story. And within that, part of it's conscious and part of it's unconscious. And within that, there's different pod powers, yada, yada, yada. Okay, so when you have two people, one thing you'll notice is that when two people are together doing a choreography, instinctually or otherwise, they have a different energy about them, not unlike cops. You know what I mean? They actually are used to being a pair of detectives, for example. When they walk in, they generate a tremendous amount of power. Two things do this. One is their skill training. They're both, say, detectives. They've been given training that other humans haven't had. Okay, so that's true. But the other part is the cohesion. The working together, being on the same job. They want the same thing. They want to close those cases and do well as a team. They want to fight crime and also outperform the other detective duos. They will be the top duo in the department. That goes a long way. Do you know how you become the top duo in a department? By deciding you want to be the top duo in the department. It's the first thing. So intention. Once you set intention, this gets like the Fumasa stuff, you know, like a purification, whatever. Once you set the intention, then you'll realize you'll have to do certain things. For example, if I want to hook up with elite Naiji, I present myself in certain ways, which means I'm getting a lot of flack from other people, but I don't care about them. I care about elite Naiji. Next, I need really awesome Nijai. I'm going to get that through being cool with elite Naiji and then making elite Naiji where I'm not elite directive douchey. I'm like elite, but I'm cool with adaptives. That's how it works, in that order. I actually must impress other Naiji. and then I actually have to go past that, improving that game to impressing Nijai. If that happens, then we're actually Jinai dudes, all kinds of very close alchemies, so we can work on a mission together. It's very much like Scrabble or building molecules. You add one or two elements on that other people can't because they're unwilling to master themselves or do the heroic things they need in order to link up with other heroes. It dramatically improves your games. It's actually very analogous to what I've always said about people who don't have a good connection with their other. It's actually, this is kind of like a Fumasta expansion on that. Yeah, it's kind of like other to Fumasta. With the other, if you are not able to connect with your other's powers, no matter how good you are in your conscious powers, you're nowhere near your top game. You just can't be, because it's almost like mixing two chemicals together to have a really cool chemical reaction that is so spectacular, but the two elements on their own don't do that. They only do when they're mixed together like that. Well, this is now taking it with other people, not just your own other, which would be the immediate one, but taking it out to all the mojas and realizing I have to be able to stack that on me. But to do so means I have to grow. I can't be just Naiji, because then, even if I'm like okay with other Naiji, because then Jinai, for example, wouldn't want to be around me. Jiayi, for example, wouldn't be around me, and I don't get their powers. I'm talking, there's an altruistic angle here, which I care about deeply, but I'll portray it right now in bubble building is power. You actually are diminishing your worldly power. So for your first personal power, I would say the first major thing is getting your conscious powers. The second one, your other. Get those 4 unconscious power. Third, social alchemy. You gotta be able to stack up. Gotta be able to stack with other humans, because all the great things humans do comes from heroes who are able to link together. And when that happens, it only takes like 5, 10, 20 heroes who are all on the same page to do incredible things. But it all comes down to the HR. If you have a band of geniuses who are doing rock music and they cannot get their ego shit straightened out, boom. One album, brilliant. They could have had 2, 3, or 4, 10 brilliant albums, but they couldn't get that band dynamics together. They couldn't hold 5 people together that could have been held together. And because they were unable to master that life maneuver, that's it. That's as far as they could go. Stupid and weak. So, next, the trio. The trio introduces, now I go a little faster now, but those two are crucial to set bubbles. Now we start talking how that dynamics are going to change. In the first 5 gradations, they're done by single digits. Afterwards, they get larger size jumps. But in the beginning, every single member up to 5, it changes dynamics crucially. Anyone who's having a family, have you been by yourself? Did you get married? Did you have a kid? Did you have 2 kids? Did they bring home someone else? Like that, because in the beginning, every single person dramatically changes the dynamic, because you're going from like 100%, you bring in a second person, you're now 50% of the bubble. Third person, 33%. Fourth person, 25%. Fifth person, 20%. After that, it gets so tiny it doesn't matter because it's just big bubbles. But in the beginning, that does rock people. It's something that can happen. This actually gets into, like, say, church building dynamics, which comes up later on in this gradation. People are unwilling to accept what it takes to go to the next level, and so they're stuck being at a small size. This starts early on. If you don't do the right things to attract your other, or your inverse mojo, or your same source, you can't get to number 2. You can't get there, you can't get to number 3. And you need that. In the third dynamic, what happens? There's going to be clumping within the bubble. There's going to be, for example, right here, we actually have 3 of us. They're both Nijai, I'm Naiji. That's going to happen because as soon as you bring in 3, and this goes into family dynamics, 3 children. This is well known, the dynamic between 1 child, 2 child, 3 children. The third child, there's going to be a pairing off. Now, it doesn't have to be the same 2 always pairing off, but they will pair off on certain things, because once you have 3, that brings the dynamic that 2 of them on certain things will have a stronger compatibility. It doesn't mean they can't all be compatible, but they'll keep switching. This comes out, for example, on mojos, but also classically, for example, in having one person being a lead, and the other 2 are kind of like learning from them, or having 2 people be sort of senior, teaching a third, or 3 people who are all kind of equal, but they take turns with their specialties being lead. Those are 3 radically different dynamics, and as soon as the third digit comes in, those dynamics are in play. If you do not recognize them, you're going to lose. You're not going to do well. That's like actually raising your kid and thinking that when I have 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids, that's not dramatically changing the life I'm going to be leading, right? It's not, so you have to think how important this is, but it's not just with babies you have, it's with anything. People you bring on your team, people that you want to work with closely for sharing sensitive information to you, things that are important to do, but it's very careful how they be. Family's a good thing for you to hold on to because you realize, yeah, I live with them all the time. You know what I mean? Like, wow, living in a house, same square footage, 3 people versus 4 people. The sound alone dramatically increases. Because that's something important to know too. As an IG who I want to impress my other, that gives me incredible powers that other IG don't have. They don't do that. But there's a price I pay, which I'm totally willing to pay. I have to please my other. I have to do the things in the environment outside of my own needs. I have to take care of my other's needs. This continues now. You have to take care of the third person's needs. If you don't pay that, you're not going to get what you're supposed to get from a third member. But if you do pay the dues of having a third member, for example, accepting that you're taking up more space. As simple as it sounds, you may be a 2-person operation, and now you have to actually figure out where the third person is going to sit. As simple as that. All of a sudden, you only have 2-person place settings, now you have to go get another one. That takes extra effort, but you're getting a third hitter possibly, if they're cool. So again, we're talking about that trade-off of the juice and the squeeze. You know what I mean? Is that third member worth it? But also, are you paying what you're supposed to be paying? So whenever the partners, kind of like when a partner team, a cop team, they bring on another person, they have to agree. Do we both agree that we're bringing this person on? Because if not, why bother? Right? Why go through the farce? If the 2 partners have not agreed to bring in the third person's not in. They're not in unless it's been decided it's now going to be a 3-person bubble. Okay. And the partners will have to accept that will bring in those dynamics of having like the clumping off and then the 2 of the 1 over the 2, 3 different experts. You're going to have to get smarter. Politics. Special pupils, the politics directly gets more complicated as you go up, but it's worth it. Politics kind of do everything. So, but that is something you have to do. It's a mental effort. It's a mental and psychological, emotional effort you have to put out, but how else are you going to get a 3-person team? If you think you can get another way, no. What are you going to do? You're going to buy a third person? You're going to pay for them? Okay, no, you have an employee. You have a 2-person team with a paid employee. That's what it is. It's like in partner firms, oftentimes. The people who are tight, like the partners, maybe like 10, 20 of them, they're a bubble. The people who don't know them personally, who don't go to their house, that aren't really friends with them, they may work with them, but they're not really part of the bubble. This gets another thing, I won't get too complicated, but bubbles can actually have like degrees. Kind of like sun, like the Goldilocks zone, and further out is cold and too hot. But you are going to have the strongest at the center. I'm only talking about that level right now. So in most like corporations with like partnerships, they've maybe been good friends who then went into business together. True bubble building in this context would be when they're talking about taking on another partner. Do you mean in this context, like law firms, where a partner could be like a 12th or 15th member of the team, but they're going to take on a producer. Maybe producer's a good name. You have producers, and then the other people they pay to do things. They're not producers, which means they're not directly in the bubble. So when you bring in a producer, so it has a lot to do with Pilot Productions, you have to ask yourself, we're giving them producer status. Anytime you bring someone into this level of people pool bubble, you're making them a co-producer. So you have to ask, what are they bringing to the table? And what are we offering them? And that has to be honored to both ends. The quartet is something we around here often call the table. And this is because there's a spirit form for the number 4. It probably relates a lot to just naturally the way the brain is wired. People put things out in architecture and carpentry without even thinking about it. And it also probably has to do with the typical familial unit, which is like, 2 parents and 1 child per parent. So how it came about, and obviously 4-legged tables done really well. 4 people sitting around a table is a very strong motif. And if you are ever out and about, if you bring 3 people in and sit down at a table, you are 1 person short. Whether you want to be or not, the tables are designed pretty much for 2 tops and 4 tops in general. 2, 4, and 8 is a standard sizing, and 8 is usually considered like a banquet table. 8 larger. That's like a feast of some sort. But standard dining is like 4. So once you have 4 people, the upside is you can fill that space. That's a major cellular unit in this kind of math. Other humans will recognize that a table has shown up, a full table. Vice versa, the politics. Now we're going to start to bring in, obviously the internal politics continue to get more complex because there's 4 people, right? You can have 2 pairs, 2 mentors or 2 mentees. There are all kinds of variations there. But the environment will start to notice you. Once you hit 4, you're a table, which means when you come in, you get treated a certain way. This is a fact. If you've ever done, any studies in the food industry, for example, particularly as far as like waiting on tables, that kind of statistics, that people get treated differently when they come in. If they come in at 1, 2, 3, 4, or 4 plus. That's generally how it's conceived, because it's how much of the full table are you taking up, because you're taking up an hour, for example, to eat of their space, and you only fill 3 of it. You're treated as a bubble more valuably when you come into an establishment and you take up a full table. That means you're spending an hour of their table's time, but they got 4 customers. Other bubbles will treat you better. This is part of it. They'll also notice you. Some other people may be bothered by that. For example, 4 people at a table naturally feel comfortable and not as shy because they are the correct allotment for the table. It's psychological. So they'll begin to expand their voice without even knowing it because they feel more at ease, because they basically now have imported a bubble. Once you have 4 people, you basically have like a little square box formation that's very difficult to break. This can bother people in the environment. People who came in 1s and 2s and 3s. Except that smaller bubbles will be bothered by you. That's part of the process. That's G and Z. If you understand this, that's part of it. This or this, as you expand that kind of bubble, other bubbles will be attracted to you and try to get with you, and others will dislike your growing and try to end that progress. That's a new politic entering the dynamic, and you just have to accept it. If you don't, then accept being small. The quintet, what we often call here colloquially, the handful. And again, I think this has a strong spirit form motif to probably human evolution, which is that you realize we've evolved for, thousands, probably millions at this technology with 5 fingers. So humans have been actually rattling off Bob, Steve, Stan, Mary, and Sally for our entire time. So I believe that directly relates to how our brains have evolved, because our brains have been evolving to do stuff with a 5-digit interface. So something to mention a lot is how many things come in 5s. And once you go out of 5, you stop having the individual connection with them. It's like Sally, Steve, blah, 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 blah. And then after that, it's like a team. It's that team. And you tend to not go directly into names. At 5, that's usually the largest that people directly start using still the name of the person. A strong motif here is this actually has a movement to it. It's like a table that can move, because the 5th person operates like a center post. They're the leader. And so the table was actually the center post when the 4 were there. With the 5th person, who's been a leader, they can now table up around a moving object. This adds mobility to that table formation. And we're playing around that right now, actually. And it's very, very cool. And the environment treats you very, very differently. And you feel different. It's not just them. You do feel different. It's not like a fake feeling. You are wired, all humans, to actually work together with other humans and be different and feel different in those bubbles, those alchemies. So with the 5, that's usually the largest of what I call the direct team. There's another stage, this is the 6th gradation, where you are still a team. And usually at this point, you can be, I would say, family friends. Once you hit the 6th gradation, it's too many of you. Even if you're family, you'll be treated like a team. You'll be called the Joneses or the Chenots because there's like more than 5 of you. And when more than 5 people show up, that changes the dynamic. For example, if you go into most establishments like coffee shops or whatever, most of them have like, small one has like maybe 20 seats, up to a large one has like 100 seats. That's like 10. I've seen some tiny ones. We went and had only 8 seats. We went there, walked the other day with like an 8-seater. Yeah, so like 10 to 100 seats. When you bring in up to five, that would be, say with 100 seats at the outside, like 5%. That's about as much as you can stimulate the environment anywhere without being noticed. Once you go over 5 people, you're breaking that magic 5% barrier. And this is so established in the human wiring that it doesn't actually even have to be an establishment. If you walk around with over 5, the general ambient thing in the environment is most people are paying attention around them to about 100 people. Not directly, ambiently, and not 100 like out. Like if they were surrounded by people, they could pay attention to about 100. And humans have been doing this their whole existence, so that's already there. Even if there's only 4 people around, the general scope around you is about 100. That's why most restaurants, that's how many they have. And you notice that they get more than that, what do they do? They have another building or an adjacent special VIP lounge, because that's the size. Over 100, 200 at the max, like churches, it doesn't feel tight anymore. It doesn't feel like a bubble. So that's built in. The way that relates to going over 5 is humans innately notice and often flinch when that many people show up. Because imagine this, if 100 people were there, most of the 100 people are going to be between groups of 1 to 5. Even in 100, it would be those. So if a new bubble came into 100 people in the environment that was 6 to 10, which is the next group here, it would get noticed. So if you bring that into a vacuum, it'll definitely get noticed. Because humans come wired like a little program that says, in my median area, kind of like, like 100%. Each human is a 1%, and what's the demographics? Humans naturally do that, like using 100 people as a barometer for the percentages. 100 people equals 100% of my environment. That's a 6 to 10% shift in the environment. If we all know economics, that's, you know what I mean? 1 to 5% shift you can kind of swallow. Above that, no, that's dramatic movement of the data. That's eek. I have to know if I like that, and what if I don't? I can't do anything about it. Once you start getting to the next gradation, which is 6 to 10, there is the element of very dramatically other people can't do this, because when you come in, you'll feel it right away in stores and shops. If you come in as a group of 1 to 5, you'll be given 1 salesperson, often. If you come in 6 to 10, you'll get 2, because they'd be stupid not to. They'll lose you, because humans know instinctually that the more natural or easier number is 5. So as you walk into a store, if a person locks on to the group, it's difficult to hold the attention of all 10. One person will probably get a handful. The other handful will mill around and you might lose their business. So you actually need to be treated as a special creature. Salespeople notice instinctually, if a group of 10 comes in, you don't treat it like a group of 2. Not unless you're a fool. Do you want to go out of business? So, this is just very documented kind of a phenomenon. Now, the 10 is what I consider to be the largest that a team can be. Something we do, say, go in the field, is you have like the center person and the 4 positions around them. You can double those up. You can have a leader and a co-leader or assistant leader, and then you can have like the north, south, east, and west positions, and you can double them up. For example, let's say I'm doing activity A and I'm going in the field doing that. I'm an IG, I'm the leader here. I could have a Nijai co-leader with me, so all 8 powers were represented for that. And then the 4 positions around, each of those 4 positions could have a Nijez pair, so that all 8 powers were doing that activity. That's about the most you can hold, and that's a storyline. That's a very successful storyline with, say, in that case, say 10 Nijez, and they all know the Nijez story. Above that, you're going to have to get into some more expansive dynamics where the direct interaction is not as significant. And this is why you have to have your game down, because you can do it if the magnetic pulls you've done so far are strong, established, and on the mark. Touching the further ones is easy, but as we mentioned before, like social alchemy, trying to actually handle a bad Vi alpha encounter when you can't handle a bad Ni alpha or Ni alpha encounter, that's just so difficult. But it's much more achievable if you can already do those, because you have built so many abilities up that now that's actually a reasonable challenge for you. First 5 gradations is 1 to 1, but now we're gonna get big chunks. So now we're jumping. So the 6th gradation it's not the pretty much easy to band up the hand. You're now gonna get 2 hands. It's very much true. You're basically going with a one-hand team to a two-hand team. That's about as big as a team will be because that's all the digits you can kind of rattle off. And it just seems to be natural that way. I've done a lot of these kind of things in all kinds of different situations, and that number 10 is a magic number. It's like once you hit that, you're in the double digits and the dynamics change dramatically. You get into what I call larger group dynamics, in which case you need to use the 10 you have to deal with the next ones. That starts now. You kind of need, even within the 5 to the 10, you saw that there was going to be the leader and the assist. There's like a tier system within the bubble. When you go from 10 people to more, you have to, because you don't have that immediate radial. So that radial has to touch the next radial, which is why your mastery of the earlier bubbles indicates how big you'll be at the larger bubbles. Because we'll get later on to a magic number called 200, but there's a lot of these where you're kind of limited as a human and the way we're built naturally as to how many interfaces you can have, but you are not limited into how big a bubble you can have. You can have a bubble that takes over the whole planet, the whole solar system, the whole cosmos, but you'll have to do it in these number increments. You can't lead 5 billion people at once. You lead 5 people who lead 10 people who lead this, who lead this, who lead this. Okay. The 7th gradation is going from here, and that is going to be 10 to 15. 10 to 15. At that point, you're kind of like a crew. There's a motif for this because generally when you see 10 to 15 people, imagine yourself, usually they're coming out of an office lunch gathering together, or they're, I don't know, Boy Scout troops, or they're a sports team. So there's some, and people note this, there's some reason why more than 10 people are clumping up. And even with just 10 to 15, you'll notice when you go to restaurants, there's a problem. 1 to 5, you can do 1 table. 6 to 10, they can bring 2 tables together without much fuss. Over that, you actually had to make reservations, or they had to really reconfigure their place. Most places are not designed to hold 10 to 15 parties. So you'll have to account for that. That's going to be more of a challenge. Upside is the environment will feel you because you take up space. And it's difficult to get to you. At this point, you have a bit of a buffer because the immediacy is like the 5, and then you have the 10, and now you have more. So when the environment comes to you, they're going to kind of run into a bit of a bubble moat. Those extra people, they kind of add. It's not like, for example, if you're around family, you necessarily not grouping with them, but you're kind of getting along decently well. If you go to an environment that you don't like, let's say you're being talked to by a person at a restaurant, a stranger, you don't like them, you can hide within your family. If it's a family gathering of like 10 or more, do you mean that's enough people that you can actually like go with that 10 radial? The 11th person, if they're being bothered by the environment, can actually with the penguins in the cold. Yeah, you can actually go in, and the environment can't get to you. You can make a little border there that the environment can't get to unless you want it to. And that's really, really kind of cool. The one thing you have to watch out for is that you don't lose people, because if everyone doesn't know what they're doing, which is like oftentimes this comes from like a specific team activity that draws people together, there can be a tendency for the people over 10, whoever they are in this analogy, to be a little lax in being with the bubble. So they have to make sure there's a cohesive mission or reason that this bubble is together. So everyone knows without being told if they're straying from keeping the bubble up. To make sense, everyone has to kind of know that. On this, as you can see, has a tremendous amount to do with intentional communities. Role-playing games, things like this. I mean, if anyone decides to not keep up the bubble, then it drops it, and everyone else has to kind of keep the weight up. Crucial element here. It's better to go smaller and better than bigger and worse. So you want to, kind of like a fighter or wrestler or whatever like that, you want to compete at your weight class. You want to find the ideal weight that you actually can get a lot of strength, but not be flabby, not actually just be big, in which case you will raise the attention of the groups. It is not a good idea to raise the attention of other 10 to 15 size group in your area if you don't act like a good or strong 10 to 15 size group yourself, because you're just kind of like an upstart and they're going to note you and they're going to use their stronger 10 to 15 size bubble to put you down. And you have to accept that. Bubbles are all trying to push their agenda. It could be an agenda of like, we want to have a good time. That's fine, but another bubble may decide they don't want to have a good time. And it's a battle. They're going to be down, for example. They decide like, Vi, we're going to get all uptight about details. It can become a battle. Let's say,
bubble.
Yeah, one Vi Alpha. Now, I'm not sure to beat up on Vi Mojos here. I'm just using this analogy. But let's say, because I have the DJ ladies here, so I'm going there. But let's say you have a Vi Alpha, and they basically start becoming kind of like, upset about some details. Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But right now, I'm not even going to get into right or wrong. I'm talking about power. The Vi Alpha is pumping out that message. The Ni Alpha can actually boot up Irrepressible. And you're now getting like a magic user battle, a bubble battle. Okay, this is good stuff. You want to learn how to do this. The Ni Jai could actually go grab her Ni Jai friend. If they come in, this relates actually to the booster. It's actually very much related to using that purpose. You can up the Irrepressible, and even though that person has technically not agreed that they're losing, they are. In the environment, natural law is observing this, and the Ni bubble is growing. That means the Ni bubble is stronger. That's a fact. In this analogy. It doesn't mean that it's right, but it does mean it's stronger, and it does mean most humans will interpret that as right. If 5 Vi Alpha show up and then pump that signal out, there's 5 people saying that message versus 2 people saying this message. Nothing has changed. They're making the same arguments, but now that team is winning. The Vi Alpha team is winning, and they seem right. Why? Because they're winning. Because they're stronger.
Strength in numbers.
Strength in numbers. So it's one of those things kind of like fire. People might go, oh, that's evil. It's not evil, or it's not, ooh, good, do whatever you want with it. It's simply a math. It's there that you should use. You have to use it. You just do. And use it heroically. So it's not a question of use or not use. It's a question of doing it heroically. You just have to do it. And you should do it heroically. So 15 to 25 is basically a tribe. Usually when you have 15 to 25 people, that's some sort of like organized effort. Even like in sports teams, usually when you have like 25 people, 15 people often, but definitely at 25, you usually have first string and second string. You usually don't have all 25 team members on the field like soccer teams. Even teams have a lot of people, like football teams. They don't have those all on the field at one time. Why? It's difficult to coordinate that. You're going to see a very important element brought in now, which is cycling. Now this is more complicated. Notice it just keeps getting more and more complicated, but that means you can do cooler stuff. So what is the complication here? About 10 to 15, as you mentioned, is kind of the range for keeping like a single, like, I don't know, team squad on point. So now you're bringing in is you have 2 squads. Usually when you have 15 to 25, there's more than one squad. For example, tribe. Why do you call it a tribe? Because it's implied. There's probably at least 2 or more families. If you have 15 to 25 people, that probably is not one family. At least not one immediate family. It's somehow extended, you know, 2 cousin families or whatever. So that means they can act as one, but they also do to some extent need to be treated as separate units within that, kind of like going off and on, taking turns. So you could have first string, second string, or it doesn't have to be one's worse than the other. It can be, for example, offense, defense, right? You have the offensive line goes out when you are actually with the ball, and they're football players, and then when you don't have the ball and the other team has the ball, what do? You take those people out and bring in the defensive team. The defensive team and the offensive team, they know each other, hopefully they're friends, they work well together, and they consider themselves to all be part of that team, and they're all on point. But there is going to need to be some shift work. This 1525 brings in the concept of shift work within the bubble, and that will be necessary at this size, because having all 25 operate at once, you'll get a lot of people stepping on each other's toes. It's not really efficient. But it doesn't mean you don't want to walk around without a 25 size bubble. That's nice. A department is kind of saying this, sort of like you have like doctors who are experts at the tops. Once you have like 25 top doctors, Obviously, this is not modern. This has been done back from like a long time, medieval times. Very early on, once you get that many experts, you split off. It just happens. Generally, when you bring experts into the room, what is it? Like a boardroom. Most boardroom tables are designed to hold about 15 people, max. You go larger than that, but it's actually hard to talk to people. 50 people around a table, larger than that, you have to shout. So generally, that's the number. So once you get 25 expert doctors, you're going to start saying there are surgery experts and there are medical experts. Now, they may meet at different conventions and work together day in, day out, so they are a single bubble. But within that, there will have to be shift work. It's just more efficient. And actually, by squeezing the sub-bubbles of those two things and making sure they're on point together, that's how they link up. Actually, if you try to make people, we're all on the same page completely, at certain number sizes, that doesn't work. Trust me, I'm an IG, I'm a master of this kind of math. You cannot keep together human consistency at those numbers. There's going to be differences in them. If you don't account for them, they'll start to break apart within your bubble. You mean that the bubble will not hold. Even if you hold together through strength of will, you'll spend most of your time just holding it together without the bubble doing its own thing. When you do it right, the bubble positively has a life of its own. And that's what you want. You want a bubble to have life of its own, but to be, the Frankenstein you want. Ninth gradation. This is probably going to be 25 to 50. And this relates to what's often talked about, say, in sociology is like the clan size. This is a natural number that sort of clumps together naturally. It's a loose hold. Think about loose gravity. It's a loose gravitational hold, but it's the most that kind of, and over time it just holds. You can make this extremely powerful and super tight, but this is a number that will routinely get brought up on its own by loose gravitational holds. You'll frequently see this, for example, with a local community where there are a lot of people who are from the same family line. So what happens is you're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of cousins, there's a lot of uncles, there's a lot of things like that. So it's easy to kind of have like an informal extended family. 25 to 50 is like the informal extended family. You can make that like a tight unit, but that will form naturally. Humans have evolved to kind of like loosely have an extended family about 25 to 50, what's often called a clan. This clan is usually made up of a couple tribes, and tribes, especially like small tribes, for example, when it first starts out, are usually made up of a couple families. So this size is usually the most naturally that comes about without much intentional effort of people being like-minded. Most often that's from just being related to one another, but it can be for something else. I mean, for everything from like, corporation mission statements to like gangs. But they kind of have like something in common. Something in common is like a magnetic force that can bring together about 25 to 50. Okay. With that, you're going to actually have a message, because you're not going to be able to have that immediate rapport. You will know them personally. You still have that magnetic pull, but you can see you stepped away from that five, that tight, like me, Bob, Stan, like we're like blood brothers or blood sisters or whatever. So you can't be like blood brother, blood sister with 50 people. You can be family with them. And within that family, you're going to have clumps of blood brothers and blood sisters who can clump together. That's the ideal. Clumps of blood teams who can be on the same message together. This relates also with how there's rolling out and why we had to put this message out, because this may seem like problematic now, but not for what I want. I have an idea of what I'm trying to build, and I need to clump together the right kind of planet. So you need to have the message. My message is people who want to be scientifically spiritual, heroic, awesome, and want to actually fix this world and are not going to take no or wait for an answer. That's what I need to stack. So that's the message. So right now I'm just trying to find the compounds to stack that, and then they'll magnetically pull more of what we need. This gradation is 50 to 200 people. By the last one, 25 to 50 also sometimes matches up with some studies in church building, for example, and that's often known as like the family church. So it's a church that almost kind of evolves spontaneously. A person had planted, but like the family just sort of developed. And within that, it doesn't have to be a preacher, it could actually be a family member. Usually a patriarch figure will develop in there sort of by default. That's needed. 50 people can't directly interact, and they can't make everyone gets a vote decisions. There will need to be more of a pyramiding effect in some way once you start getting this size, because there's too many people to get direct buy-in. So you're actually going to have sort of like direct buy-in and semi-direct buy-in. And in order to get that, and this gets into, for example, we're doing like the media productions, you'll generally have to start writing things down some. Even like in families, they don't write down. There's an informal oral tradition of how the Joneses do it, how the Chenots do it. So there's like a culture. Once you get to 50, a culture develops, and you have to make sure it's a culture you want. And you need to have a culture. If you don't, it will make one. 25 to 50 people will start having their own lingo. They'll start having their own inside jokes. So you have to make sure that's going the way you want, because it will. That will just happen, because there's people know each other, and that's a large amount. And if you know each other for any amount of time, a culture will develop. That's enough people. 25 to 50 is enough people for a culture, for sure. You should be building it prior. You should be building it, as I mentioned, with a bubble of one. You are your own culture, your own story. However, you better have that done right by the time you get to 25 to 50, because there's now this ongoing like family or clan story, which you need to take the reins of. 50 to 200. This is generally the largest bubble you can have with personal interaction. But with this one, there is and needs to be, usually or will work, a galvanizing figure. So the 25 to 50 people, you'll usually get a central figure involved, but that happens by default. And usually the 25 to 50 are selecting that. With 50 to 200, this is why you understand right now, although we're small, I'm actually planning on the way we're going to be doing things to get really, really huge. In order to do that, first it starts with you actually have to have a singular vision. There actually has to be a strong vision that people can actually identify with and get on board with, a platform. You can't just have the innate gravitational pull of being like-minded. That will only take it at 50. Over 50, the environment's going to give you a lot of problems, particularly when the first problems you run into is where you go. It's very hard to find a place to put 50 plus people. 25 to 50, you can get away with houses. You probably have several people who can house, if they have decent money, for example, who can house in their home, 10 to 35 people. So if you switch those around a lot, you can kind of keep the 50 together. You're seeing around 50 because most homes, you go on meetup.com, you see it, but people have different locations for the meetings. Usually like personal homes, about 35, maybe 40, that's like max. Usually 50 people, that's if they're going to be like outside the backyard some. After that, you're out of the house, you're in your backyard, where are you going to put these people? So there needs to be a concerted effort of what these people are going to do and how they're going to support themselves. You basically have like an army on the move right now. You have to be able to provision them. Provisioning over 50 people becomes a major issue, because within 50, 20 to 50, although it's getting quite large now, you can basically work with workarounds that work for smaller groups. Like, let's use this person's backyard. Let's combine 2 buses, or 2 caravans. You can kind of like do a lot of these like normal life things, but like stack a few minivans together and you can actually carpool 50 people. Have you seen 200 people go down the road? Even in minivans, we're stuffing like 10 in there. That's getting large. That's like 20 cars going down. More than likely, cars are like tables, 4 per. That's 50 cars. Even at, say, 50, when you break 50, 52, for example, or 48, that's a dozen cars. So try to imagine how these impact people and impact your environment. Where are you going to park? All these kinds of things. You're like, wow, it's a hassle. Yeah, but I think we all know what 50, 200 people can do. Yeah. If it's done right, they can do more than 50 people can do. Not that the 50 people are tighter than the 200, But if you can make a 200 as strong for its stage, then it can do more. That's just the way it works. It's math. You study like, cosmology, size kind of plays a large part in things. So the 11th gradation is 200 people to 500. Now these numbers, by the way, are not set in stone. They do get more pretty much dead on as you get closer to the earlier ones, like solo, partner, and so forth. When you get these larger clumps, there's obviously range here based on a variety of factors. Different things sort of endemically that may make the cohesion easier or harder to do. And then different mojos can do that more or less easily. So 200 to 500, you're kind of continuing the element that was already starting to come up, which is that at 200 you need to actually have some sort of like mission statement. Otherwise you can't get any people to go along with it. At this point though, a single person, gradation 10, could speak that. They could go to each individual person and they could get on the same page together as two humans. And then you get on the same page with everyone you talk to, you can maybe get up to around 200 like that. Okay, after 200, you physically, if it's not 200, it's some other number, but it's a finite number, it's around there. You're going to get to where you simply cannot have that kind of interaction. You need to mass interact. Starting at gradation 11 begins the mass interacting. So the first element of that is going to be, say, 200, 500. You're going to have within there, say 200 is your max for personal interaction. Let's say you have a 400 size. That means half, exactly half in this analogy, but some portion, some large portion, you don't have personal interaction with, which means their interaction with you comes ambiently. But if done correctly, that ambient interaction with you will keep them in. But you'll have to have, obviously, just like the social alchemy groups, you'll actually have to have your 200 super core, because that's how you can stack this extra amount on. Because that extra amount, you're here, and you can kind of build around you directly where you are kind of like touching from your inner core. Kind of like in the earth, the core, the mantle, and the crust. There comes a point, though, where you're stacking there that you can't really directly feel it. When you stack that next person on, that next person spends so much time talking to people that aren't you, that they have a strong connection with you because all those people know you and all talk about the same thing, philosophy, ideology, business plan, whatever, but they don't personally know you. So this is a part, for example, when churches build, it can be difficult because you have to completely change the way you look at things. It's not a personal interaction anymore, it's a message, and that message needs to be put down into some kind of concrete form. Because with the 25 to 50, there's kind of like a informal culture. You could write down, I recommend you do, but you can get by with just informal. 50 to 200, I recommend writing it down and making it so it's solid, but you can get away with just one person who's really into it, personally speaking, to 200 semi-direct reports. Does that make sense? That's about as far as direct reporting you can have. So, reporting. You're now getting to where there are elements of corporate structure and elements of mojo journalism and of breaking a story and of getting story information that come into play because you don't directly know all your constituents, although you're in it together. You're in it to win it together, but they may bring in things that are not something that is of the dialogue that you are having with people you have a direct interaction with. So you can be surprised more now. Your own congregation has a great ability to surprise you because you don't actually interact with them directly. You may have Bob, who's one of the 200 you do, and he says Sam, who's a cool guy you're aware of, you met Sam a few times, and he's Bob's friend, but mainly he hangs out with Bob, although he's in your bubble. Bob said something to Sam, who's now saying it to you. That political dynamic. Remember, people being more complicated? That's the complication. You're now getting secondhand information and interaction in your own bubble. Your own bubble is large enough to create secondhand word. gossip really starts, and obviously have gossip all the way down to any group, but it picks up a lot now because it could go unquestioned for quite some time or unnoticed. So it has to be a formalization of what is the point we're going for and are we on point. That can't be done person to person. The individual can't, forget like Mojo reading. If you have a good Mojo reader who's really good at evaluating development, like myself, I can personally evaluate on an ongoing basis maybe up to 200. After that, which is why the website is set up the way it is, because like program churches are like this, corporations are like this, teams of all sizes are like this. We will have to do this as well, although we're going to do it better because we have better principles. But I can only train those people so much, but I want to train more. Materials will have to do it. So with Podlayer, you're really seeing this, the website. The website is here to set up pretty much post 200. We're going to bulldog and kind of just bring in people and get a good rapport and really show them that everything is true, that we're saying it's true, up to about 200. After that, that'll take on a life of its own, and more people will come in automatically, and we're going to have to be able to deal with them without having personal interaction all the time. I also have some, but not enough to be like we know each other really, really well. So for us, it's the website designed to let people know what's going on. A non-human voice, the different protocols, the principles, the way the leveling up is done, all that is actually to have a bubble that is a people bubble, but it is something that is created and then oftentimes put into a Z form. Because you're actually seeing a lot of combination of G and Z in this bubble building. At this point, although we're talking people, you cannot build a systemic bubble too big without introducing the humans. That's just the way it works. And this is a people pool bubble building, which means it's starting on the G end of it. But once you get to a certain size, it's around 200 people, you have to bring in the Z element because the G can't hold it. You're going to have individual clumps of G, and those need to be coordinated, extremely well coordinated, and you need Z for that. That kind of starts with having a program. You'll also need to satisfy people who are going to have different tastes. Even though we're all in the same message, there are going to be need for different tastes and different programs. Luckily, Podlayer is very well developed for that in that we have the temples. So it helps to actually know that you are part of all of Podlayer, but it also helps to kind of zero in into smaller demographics that maybe have a more immediate rapport with you. That allows, for example, stepping into and out of intimacy groups. That can happen when you're over 200. If you're in a group of 400, for example, let's say a good analogy with us is how we would do it is you actually say half of them are, for example, Nijai, half are Naiji. It's like a made-up thing. We just say that for metaphor. And let's say half are they're both the hem-her and the her-hem. So you're going to have times in your life where you're feeling more like doing the hem-her thing if you're hem-her. Other times you feel more like doing the Naiji thing if you're Naiji. Other times you feel like actually hanging out with your inspirational. So even within that 400, and they're all intimately related, they're basically all romantics, hem, her, hem. But you'll probably, over the course of say 2, 3, 4, 5 years, we're getting more sophisticated now, you're going to have multiple lives, multiple sets of 50 to 200 you step in and out of, mini hobbies. Within your spiritual overall life hobby, you're going to have like mini clubs. And you'll kind of like, geek out, oh yeah, for 3 years I was really into bowling. And that was really, we allow for that in a spiritual sense and overall sense of I want to hang out and learn about my Naiji side. I want to learn about my Za. And so you need to have that, and we do have that, and that's how we account for that. But it's a necessity because it becomes too large to do as one thing. It has to be broken down into smaller areas, and why our theory has to be so delineated the way it is on these things is that will have to be done without direct supervision, oftentimes, by the inner leadership. The way it should work, and this is why you need to use Z, you can do that if you tell someone to go get me 4 boxes of such and such, and then bring me 2 boxes of something else, and then put it here at such and such a time. That's Z, and you don't need to personally supervise or mentor a person if they understood what you said in Z terms. So there's a ability to, like, do you understand Microsoft Excel? Yes. What level? This. Okay, and you can tell them various assignments, and that you don't need to be there because it's not like a G bonding. Actually, the 1 person to about 200 people is a lot of, like, directly, personally bonding. After that, you still need that obviously heavily because it's people oriented, but it really starts talking about organization, orchestrating, having people be able to be organized into departments. There will be a more corporate, departmental kind of quality to it. It's going to be cool because it's going to be like temples and danger rooms. But your temples are like departments. I have my Niji department, my Niji my Nijez department, my Nai Alpha department. They're different, like, little sub-departments I can get into. There will need to be a best practices enacted, and this is where best practices become crucial in the Z of it, because there needs to be an integrity, a structural integrity, an ethics of way of operating, so that people know when they encounter up to 200. And this is something my kind do a lot of, particularly G-Mojos. They know me. The reason they come to my business is they know me. Now, I may, for example, like say American Chopper or something, it's a business, but they come for the person. That's because there aren't that many people in that company. That company's only got, like, I think maybe 50, 70 employees. Does that make sense? So once you get over 200 employees even, you really have to go with establishing your brand, and that's what they're working on is establish, because they won't know you directly a lot of times. It's too big. Even if they did know you directly, they can't really trust you're one person in that huge thing. They need to trust the huge thing. They need to actually trust the structure, that brand operates that way. It's operating protocols I like. I'm seeking that brand out. Basically you must brand yourself at over 200 people. Up to 200 you can go with personal charisma interaction and having like a message. But message will have to go to branding if you want to go over 200. So we combine this, a lot of guys don't mind, but like big business branding and, like, you know, spiritual and personal interaction, they're all just one big soup. Now we're talking 500 to 1,000. 500 to 1,000. Did you blink when I said that? You probably did. If you didn't do it, you know, here, you actually did in your head. If I was watching you and I'm the best reader on the planet, I would have read you doing that. I've been doing this my whole life, and everyone blinks when I do that. If they don't blink here, they do it here. And the reason is, you have to do 2 things immediately. You don't have a choice. It's human nature for any mojo. One is, what does that look like? You probably don't know. You may have been to a concert, but very few people, even people who actually go to churches or parts of big businesses that have like annual conventions and so forth, you'll have to think of the last annual convention you went to summon up what 500 or 1,000 people look like who are all on the same page. It's an anomaly. It's a significant anomaly, so you'll have to blink and go into your Jai or Zai or Vi or Nai or something and try to actually figure out when was the last time or how that looked. You'll need to contextualize. That's important to note because it hits that big. The second thing is, you're going to have to ask yourself, and it's very much related, how you feel about that. This phenomenon has been building up before, and we mentioned about like 5 people versus 10 people versus 15 versus 25, etc. in a restaurant. And that's because it's kind of an enclosed environment, so like that maybe 100 plus seating capacity, you notice it there. 500 to 1,000, you notice that everywhere. Not just everywhere, tangibly, intangibly, and that's why you blinked. You blinked when I said that. Because that's power. Just the sound of it. Just listen to roll off your ears. 500 to 1,000 people. Try to be adaptive with that. Seriously, try to knee that up. 500,000 people. It still sounds like a monster party. There's actually no way not to make that sound like a monster. A big thing has entered it. If you have any greed in you, 500,000. This is well known, by the way. You can actually begin having a niche business. If you actually have 500 to 1,000 reoccurring customers, most doctors and things like that, they would love to have 500 to 1,000 reoccurring constant patients. Obviously you can get more, but like, that's actually, you can start a business on that. This brings a new politic. You are a demographic in that way. You'll have to take charge of that because otherwise you'll be used in that way. You're a talent. Once you say 500 to 1,000, if you say 500,000, you're not bullshitting, in the room of anyone who's promoting anything, they are a fool not to pay attention to you. If that wasn't made up, if you actually know 500 to 1,000 people who actually listen to your emails or will show up to a party you would put together, that's a game changer. It's the beginning of game changing. That's a real game changing ability. Up to this point, it's mainly been about, and it still is, you do other things, but the structuring kind of takes care of a lot of that. The structuring just gets more sophisticated. But earlier, the main issue, even with Z, was like say with 1 to 200 people, even 1 to 500 people. The main issue is probably seating. That's the Z issue. Where do you put them? How do you get them together? How do you schedule? That's the kind of main Z part of it. But around 200, you have to start bringing in Z branding. If you don't brand and have it like written in stone in a non-human empirical way, for example, I'm going to need to take what I'm doing out of my hands. It'll either need to be digital eventually through facial recognition, or at least like thousands and thousands and thousands of people who are doing it, so it's so large it counts basically as a Z database. Because humans are humans, and as you may have noticed, I love humans, and humans should be as they are, but they also do have human issues. And I've read many comic book where aliens came down and go, oh, you're so human. And I actually get what that means. One of the main things is there is a heroism to Z, particularly when the more humanistic powers are reaching their limits. There are limitations to all the powers. And one of them is to remove self-interest in order to get greater, larger interest, in order that your own personal self-interest will be greater served. Humans got a hard fucking time with that. They really do. You really have to bring in Z and Zai to do that. Because you want to help yourself or those around you immediately. You want to be able to do that. And so Z will say, basically, do more push-ups. Because if you do, you'll actually like yourself better, you'll feel better, all these various things, even though it doesn't feel like that now. Over 200 people, that's an issue. You actually have to you're going to have to do these things. For example, if there's 200 people and then you have 400, 500 people, you'll actually have to keep some of them out. Like, for example, if I was to have like a direct rapport and I'm going to make a direct rapport meeting, I'm only going to be able to bring 200 of the greater number, which means there's going to have to be a Z cutoff. There's going to be some Z cutoff of who are the 200 who get to be in there. And this gets back to Mojari and various things. There's going to have to be some sort of excellence, some sort of standard of excellence. It could be anything, not just Mojari, but any power ability that means why you're being included. Z needs to do that. Humans are not really good at doing that because they want their friends to come. I know, I'm a G Mojo. I want my friends to come. But my other, for example, she has Z. And she says, we want to build this empire, she's really good at this, she's really great at HR. She's all about bringing people's power up and bringing them out. She's Nia Jai, but she's also very aware of what I and her are going to require in order to get the job done. And if it's insufficient, then you try to use Nia Jai, that's the way I like to do it anyway, it doesn't have to be, but in my case, in order to make it, cool, fun, and as humanistic as possible, but there has to be some foot putting down of the way things work. But hopefully if it's done in humanistic capacity, people understand it. That's a secret to going over 200. You got to start bringing some more overt Z in a way that the G numbers keep being okay with. That's the crucial element to making the bubble getting larger. Because, and this gets into, it's really kind of a quasi-state, a more advanced quasi-state to keep going up these bubble sizes. Because as the G gets larger, it wants to go in clannish nepotism kind of ways. Z will take that away, but it can bother people and they don't want to be around that, and so they leave for that reason. So the secret is to get them to stay together because they like one another, but these people who like one another, follow rules that they agree on. That's the magic formula for going all the way to the top. The Z shifts from the branding focus at 200 plus, at 500 plus. When you say 500, you're a power on the board, and you will, be treated accordingly. I don't agree with a lot of the things Machiavelli said, but he did say some smart things, and one of them was that all bubbles basically touch, and once you start expanding your bubble, you will get noticed. Deal with it. That's basically, when you expand, that you're going to cause attention. Good, bad, neutral, until you find out what it is. That's basically what mystery. Opportunity, emergency, mystery. As you get larger, they're going to crank up. You're going to get a lot more emergencies. You're going to get a lot more opportunity. So each stage, you really have to make sure your G and Z of this bubble building is together, because you have to maximize the bonus so that the costs you have to pay don't make the juice not worth the squeeze. So if it's not working right, it'll take too much effort to hold the bubble together and to get to do anything versus what you get out of it. But done correctly, all the way up to having every human on this planet actually like being, ooh, cool, we're all in it, being heroes together. That only works if the math is really good. So this is basically how to build people up larger and larger using natural law math. So that's how it is. Humans and natural law together getting bigger. As mentioned before, once you start touching 1,000, the Z will be approached by other Z. You'll have to have Z because that is Z. Z that's not your bubble will go, there's 500 of you, there's 1,000 of you. They'll either want to sell you or they'll feel nervous about you. Generally one of the two. Envy or desire. Those will kick in, and not just in like a sort of values-based way, like in a monetary marketplace way. You're a commodity. Over that, if it's 500 and now going to 1,000, you are a commodity. Okay, 1,000 to 3,000, you've now become a larger commodity. You can very successfully, I mentioned you can start it with 500 or 1,000, but you can very successfully have a client base of 1,000 to 3,000 people. Many a niche business where it's like one specialty person or one specialty kind of thing, if they can actually have like an online business of like 1,000 to 3,000 reoccurring customers, you can live off that. It also takes on the ability to make itself known and distinguished in other strong ambient bubbles. Prior to that, it really happens between, like I say, 500 plus, and now it really becomes an issue at 1,000, 3,000, is where do you put these people? That's the problem. The upside is if you do it correctly, the only way to do that is you can't just have coffee shops or even office buildings or things like this. You actually need to have like neighborhoods or some sort of, you begin the concept of like a mini campus. So there's the ability to almost start having a dialogue with a larger, what you consider to be polis bubble. 1,000 to 3,000 people, it's small, but that's a tickle of what would be a serious voting block. That's like a district. That's a lot of people in several neighborhoods. So you can start talking to the powers that be. That's what really starts. So 500 to 1,000, you need to start getting ready for it because you're gonna get noticed. 1,000, 3,000, it's time to start playing the game because you actually have enough chips. That's enough chips to start actually going down and saying, even if you don't get everything, but it's time, obviously you do it earlier from 2 people on up, but I'm talking at like very Z'd up, business planning, investor kinds of ways. You can start going down and start asking for people to give you investments or treat you in a special way because you are a people. 1,000, 3,000 people, it's not like being over 1,000, it's kind of like being over 10. It does something in people's heads. Over 1,000, you're those people. It's weird, it just happens like that. So now, from 1,000 to 3,000, you are those people. So deal with it. You're going to be treated like that, but you get special bonuses. So you have to do the high-level politics, the G and the Z together. But if you do, you'll be given, on easiest level, 1,000 to 3,000 people, means that you can probably get, let's say, 10% of them. What's 10%? 100 to 300. At any time, you could probably pull out 10% easy. You could probably pull hard to get like half the group or more to show up on special occasions. So anytime you want, you could get 100, 300 people to show up. That's a buying demographic. If you go up and basically every time you go on cruise ships, every time you go travel to hotels, you're always bringing 100 to 300 people minimum. That's important because 500,000, you can sometimes get special bids. But you may not be able to get that special bid every time because maybe sometimes you get over that 100 mark at a percentage, other times you don't. So the merchants of the world will see you as sometimes you're big league, sometimes you're not. 1,000, 3,000, it's just getting into big time, but it is consistently big time. If you can make at 10% 100 to 300 people show up for anything you do, that's big time. It may be just starting, but yeah, you could start getting lots of package deals and being recognized for who you are, and start having outside purveyors of goods, services, and whatever seek you out. You can advertise yourself. From 200 to 500, you kind of have to brand yourself just as far as how you're structured. Next, from 500 to 1,000, you have to brand yourself as far as what am I, because all the other bubbles are like, who is this person? From 1,000 to 3,000, you continue this branding, but for advertising reasons. You're big enough. You're big enough to advertise both we have this client base and would you like to come live with us, work with us, take a tour with us? It's like, it's like a little campus. You can invite people to a neighborhood. If you live in a neighborhood, let's make this up. Let's say a neighborhood, I don't know, how many people houses on a street? 20? 20 houses in a short street? Let's make it up, 20 houses.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Some streets are 20, so that's a decent sized street. 20 houses, let's say there's 4 people in them. Make 25 houses, it's a long street, 25 houses, and there's 4 people in it, 2 adults and 2 kids. So that means that's only about 100 people on the street. Let's say the other sides, that's one side of the street. So both sides are now 400 people. You do the next stretch of street over there and the next stretch straight over here, that goes from being 400 to being 1,200. Then you do the stretch behind that and the stretch behind that, what is that? 3,600. So from 1,000 to 3,000, you're playing a game where you can invite people to your neighborhood. Even though it may be in Baltimore or Paris, wherever, when they come there, they're basically living there. Because you can walk around and talk to all kinds of people and actually meet, because 200 uses a cap, meet more people than you're going to remember. You wouldn't remember that many people and you were still in that bubble. So that's really kind of cool. Trick. Now, continuation of the second-hand stuff. You need to make sure all your people are on the right page because you're now interacting with outside Z parties and tourists or different things like this, or consultants in whatever ways that would be, and your people are doing that, people that aren't you directly. So you have to make sure that the neighborhood is not showing its ass. Do you mean you can't directly police 1,000, 3,000 people? So those 1,000, 3,000 people have to believe in something. Maybe they're, God-fearing people. It's not my thing, but if they are all something like that, maybe they're all atheists. You can count on that. Maybe you're inviting your cool atheist friend, or you're going to simply try to seduce a cool atheist client. You need to make sure that when you bring them to your atheist community, that those 1,000, 3,000 people are like what they're saying they are. Because, and again, the Z has to come in. You don't want to be draconian, but there needs to be, some people are going to use the, here it is, the anonymity factor. You have to watch that happening and people allowing the fact that they can kind of goof off or be maybe villains or vampires or energy takers within that bubble. The Z has to be there to not allow that because you can't stack more on it. It's kind of like you stacked a house and then you're going to stack more on the house, but since these pieces are humans, some of the support structure decide, I think I'm going to stop doing it. Do you know what I mean? Now, steel sometimes crumple because there's a flaw in it or whatever, but like it usually doesn't happen. That's more Z. Humans do this all the time, where they're like no one's watching them. Now, I don't like to police people overly, and you wouldn't want to do that, but you have to accept that if you don't say that people need to level up, they won't. I've done something in my life. I've made people level up in all kinds of things I've done. They always level up if they're around me. Because I level up and I'm really cool and I generally am really awesome at anything I decide to do. So they want to be like me. So that's a direct thing. Outside of that though, that direct energy connection is lost. So they have to want to do it because it makes logical sense. And if they don't do that, then there will be repercussions and may have to leave the community, like in the campus of a college. Like if you do certain things that would make new students not like coming, then that one student, you really have to accept this. The one will need to be sacrificed for the all. It's very Z, but that's how it is. Because at this point, you have to worry about this is an issue. You have to worry about the cohesiveness and purity of the constituency you have inhibiting getting more. The upside is, if you do it correctly, it's a continuation of all the bubbles prior. The spell effect on a person is just going to be staggering. In fact, you may have heard me mention this over and over again, the number 1,000. The ability to bring a person to a temple and have them walk in and say meet 200 other mojo in that one thing. But then in a little congregation or something, or temple little experience, maybe 200 is this right size for like a banquet or something. But then from that banquet, they can walk around all over campus, like the neighborhood, and talk to 1,000 or 3,000 of those people and just get that signal. Just that mojo being done heroically and love for you being that mojo. It would just be like profound. But it's going to take a lot to do this. But this is what I signed up for, and this is what you signed up for, whether you know it or not. I know you signed. I don't want to read mojo. I know you do. You'd be stupid not to. But I want stuff too. I want to save the world, and this is how you do it. So if you want those things, understand that this is what I want. This is my overall goal. I'm trying to build up campuses that will allow people to have these mega spells. Let me talk about the Library of Alexandria and stuff, and we watch those history things. The spell that must have been like. To walk in with those thousands of people who are all about learning, and then all those books, and then when I was gone, now we have things now that can be somewhat comparable. Like at those points when they weren't there, humans, until that was recreated, and this is why it's worth it to go big if you can do it, they lacked that. Until the pyramid was built, people did not have ritual. Think about living in a world where you didn't know humans could do that. Just think about it. Whether you know it or not, you were gifted greatly. Now, a lot of pharaohs did things kind of, asinine. I don't agree with that. However, leave that aside. The simple fact of the pyramid itself, that was a gift to you. You're like, yeah, pyramids. No, humans didn't know they could do that. Even though it was another culture from another time, just reading books and knowing that humans can build that big, it told you can do it. For example, the 4-minute mile. The 4-minute mile was considered something that could not be broken by human running until some dude broke it. And they asked him, I think, about that, like, how could you do something that couldn't be done? You know what he said? Basically, he must have the right people around him. No one that was around me told me I couldn't do it. After he broke the 4-minute mile, the 4-minute mile is still really hard, obviously, but several humans have broken it. And they broke it a lot easier as far as the human collective doing that than it took for the first person doing it. Why? It can be done. Humans know that some humans can run under 4 minutes. It's a goal to shoot for. Humans can make a pyramid where they have a ritual that's like this big ass stone thing with carvings and so much art and science ladled into it with so many humans that like you can truly say, I have lived like other humans before me did not have the opportunity, the privilege. I want that. So right there, these are privileges we can offer if you can get it right. I want all these if I can do it, and I'm going to go as big as I can and keep going, because once you know you can build a pyramid, why not build a pyramid when you didn't do it with slaves? Okay, you can build a pyramid we didn't do with slaves. The pyramid kind of fell down. Why don't you build a pyramid that doesn't have slaves, that's eco-friendly and sustainable? Like once you know you can do a bubble, the next thing is go bigger. Go bigger, go better. 3,000 to 10,000 is really a continuation of 1,000, 3,000. I don't need to say a whole lot more about it except for it's almost like a continuation of a story arc. 500 to 1,000 is the beginning of your somebody. 1,000, 3,000, that is a solid somebody as a brand, whatever. And then 3,000 to 10,000, that's big. That's big time. you are a big time brand. In fact, that's about as big as you can be and still be a brand. You may think, I know brands bigger than that. No, you don't, not really. I mean, you do, but they're actually morphing into something greater than just a brand. It's a brand bubble. So 3,000, 10,000, that's most big corporations you can think about have 3,000, 10,000 employees. Anything bigger than that, something special starts happening, and that's where we get to next. 10,000 plus. 10,000 plus / town. We're now going to get out of the numbers game. Anything over 10,000, it doesn't feel like a structured number. It actually feels like a self-sustaining, complete community. That's a big morphing change from 10,000 plus. One of the main things is from 500 to 1,000, 1,000, 3,000, 3,000, 10,000, you're kind of like increasing your market position and who you interact with and your allies with out there in the world. And you're still going to continue that with 10,000 plus, but a unique phenomenon happens. The ability to do it all yourself. And that's why it goes from being 10,000 plus, a number, to town. Towns have the town doctor, they have the town diner, the town everything. They have the town everything. The ability to live there. That's where you live. That's your life. 3,000, 10,000, it still feels a bit like a corporation, if it's very Z feeling, or even G, it feels like a commune. 10,000 plus, it feels like a town, a small town, but that's a town. Because there's a reason for this. Long story short, you basically have like the 1,024 facets, and if you like multiply by 10 variations, which gives like the ability to like cross-reference 10 times, you have basically 10,000 people. So what this means is, as far as an algorithm, that at this point, you're starting to begin to see the full flowering of the algorithm. It keeps getting bigger, and obviously we have like nearly 7 billion people, and that's all in there too. But as mentioned in the filmings, if you had like only 2 people left in the world, and then they like procreated, eventually the entire story would be made manifest. But not in the beginning. In the beginning, only 2 people, so it's only 2 mojos. As you build up, there'll be more mojos represented. At 10,000 plus, you have, unless that was some sort of special thing where you were like making a huge temple or something, but if you just allowed 10,000 of even just pod layer to come in, you're going to get pretty much all the mojos and all the activities humans want to do. So you need to start seeing yourself in community building terms, such as how do we educate ourselves? Around 1,000, 3,000, you're a major demographic of a school district. 3,000, 10,000, maybe you are the school district. 10,000 plus, no, the school district is within your bubble. You are responsible for doing that. Even like in most communities, if you get 10,000 plus, even like a city, that's usually like a suburb or a county position or a town within, and they always have what? A set of things they have to do on their own. The city won't do them for that town. Towns are supposed to do a lot of stuff for themselves. You're big enough. It sounds funny like you grow a kid up, but policies are the same way. And at which you reach a certain age and size, the other larger policies, like we'll get to cities and states and whatnot, they expect you to kind of get to take care of yourself. There's 10,000 plus of you. The upside is you are a major power out there, and you actually are a thing on your own. You could even be within, obviously, different countries or whatever, but you are an indigenous people. At 10,000 plus, you are the people from that town. People from the town, we all make jokes, but what are in that town? The accent in that town, the fashion in that town. It's a small thing, but they actually do things that way. Even within a country or even a city, people in that section, that town within the city, it's like they're different people. You can do that because you can easily not just personally know all them, 200, not just make business with them, 5,000, 500, thousands, whatever. Like, you actually have to specifically drive, use transportation, walk diligently to get out of it. It's a zone. 10,000 people, like, that's actually a fair amount of real estate. You'll actually have to work to leave that thing, which means if you don't feel like it actively, or you're just neutral, you won't meet anyone else. You'll go from the grocery store that's in that bubble. I mean, because everything's in that town, there actually is not much reason to go somewhere else unless you decide that you want to, but the town doesn't have something you specifically want. That's where you get the next larger sizes. But the essentials are all pretty much taken care of in a town. Food, water, education, safety, transportation, the basics. So you'll have to do that because the people around you, the larger groups than that, they don't feel sorry for you anymore because, not that they feel sorry before, but you are kind of like one of their constituents. You're sort of seen as your own captain.
You're not the underdog.
You're not the underdog anymore. I mean, you're a town. You're becoming established. You're an established thing now. And that brings it up. I like that because you already start bringing Vi into the equation now. Not only is the town, the reason why it makes a big difference is once you go over 10,000, not only is it a lot of people, a lot of influence, that's going to last. Maybe one generation at the smallest, but probably longer than that unless something actually tries to light it out. 10,000 people all doing something, that means if they did nothing or even did things slightly wrong, probably like several thousand are going to do that next generation. And the generation after that, even if it was kind of stupid, like 5,000, 3,000 would do it. It'd probably take 4 or 5 generations before all the people who used to do it like that town dying. Towns don't die necessarily overnight usually, not if there's actually a built up way it's done. So you have to ask yourself, do I want that? And you're like, why would you not want that? Well, what if the town's racist? If it's a racist town, you could have all those 10,000, the initial 10,000, they could all die. It'll stay racist. The town is now a thing. It's a creature. It's like an intellect. You now have a 10,000 plus think tank. So this town has a way it does things, and the humans are almost subordinate. You're seeing the Z now and the Vi. It's a lot of Z and the Vi's coming in, which is why you're like, I don't want that. No, you do, because what if it's like the best city ever and they're actually teaching you how to be cool in temples? Would you want to relearn that from scratch? What if that took thousands of years? That if it took thousands of years to get good stuff, that's why you want to stay. But if it's bad, it's going to stay too. So towns become standing structures that live after the original people. That happens before as well, but you really see it then, which is why you usually call it a town. 16. City is very much like the town. I can do it pretty quickly. Obviously, no difference between town and city. It's the size. The main differences are attractions and pipelines. With the town, you may have water and all those things taken care of, and you're supposed to take care of them because you're the town. That doesn't mean you have them. It means you take care of them. So you may take care of the water in your town by going to an outside vendor. So that's acceptable in town living. In city living, and also your town doesn't really have to have anything except 10,000 plus people who are all cool being there. Just being there is the draw. That's not enough for a city. It takes more than just it's there and I know these people and there's a comfortability to get more than 10,000. It's well known, you need to build monuments, you need to build or create excellent schools, you need to make some sort of nice nature park, things that make people want to go here from somewhere else. Because, at 10,000, you've probably sucked in everyone who's in the immediate area. You know what I mean? That's what's a town. Everyone who's like anywhere nearby, they're already in. So you actually have to have people who are going to come in that are going to come in from like telephone calls and magazine brochures. You know what I mean? Like they have to come in without even seeing your town directly. They're going to see like pictures of it, or like the day, like Paris and the big cities of the world, they read about it. To go from town to city, they generally have to read about you or hear about you in order to come. So, 2 things. People want attractions, and that's it, attractions and security. As city, you want to not have to go to outside vendors as much as possible. You want to have your city reservoir. Towns can actually go to like the city's reservoir. It's not uncommon to have a city with towns around it, and the towns, they support their own water by paying for the city's water to come to them. But the city needs to do more than just have that handled. They need to have it not be able to get cut off. That's a big deal. They need, and this is the reason why cities often can have a very different life to them than the entire rest of the country. Because if it's built up enough, like Paris, Berlin, a lot of times there's a big difference between like Berliners and the rest of Germany. There's a large difference between Paris, because they don't actually have to pay attention. Not saying it's good or bad, this is just a math of it. They don't have to pay attention. They actually have two things: security, which means they have their own water, they have everything they need. It's a self-contained mini country. And they have the cooler stuff. In all of France, where's the most cool stuff? Paris. So you need to go there, they don't have to go out. That's the crucial. They don't have to leave. They don't have to leave to go get outside vendors, and they don't have to leave to get cool stuff. The world comes to them. Okay. 17 is going to be a state. State is pretty much like a city, except the ambient land around a city is now controlled and needs to be somewhat on the same page, hopefully a lot on the same page. If not, you can't have a state, because a city needs to have a great deal of real estate, natural real estate around it, and pretty much any land feature. You can't have really successfully like a marble quarry in even a city. That's kind of hard to pull off. So there are going to be some things that are just like in the mountains or in the woods, like lumber and shit. You can control that and make it part of your bubble in a state, not a city. So obviously with state, you now have an even expanded thing of no one's really coming to help you, because they're like, why don't you use the resources of your state to do it? The rest of the states of the world, the other bubbles now, at that size, are looking at you to handle state business. You're expected to be able to do that. Upside is that the city has a sort of intangible border to it, in that it doesn't need outside vendors in a lot of ways, and it doesn't need to leave for attractions, but you can't really put up a border too much unless you're going to revolt, because the state says you're part of it. The state is the smallest part, whether it's a single state country or a state within a country, that's allowed by law, by Z law, to have its own borders. Cities usually are not allowed to have borders that keep out the state. That's not allowed. States are. That's part of that bubble size. States are allowed to have borders that keep out other states. You can do that. But if a city tries to keep something out, the state will be angry, because that's actually, in politics, that's called revolt. When the state actually when a city says the state around it can't come in, that city's revolting. Okay, but when a state says another state can't come in without doing it, that's actually just correct politics. I mean, that's not even mean, that's just, borders and things going across and whatever. The region is an extension of the state, but one of the main qualities that regions often have is that they're natural boundaries. These tend to be much larger. Humans want to enclose things in something manageable. So usually this is done in town size at the beginning of that. Well, actually starts early with campuses. Campuses go to towns, then you have cities, then you have states. And these are ways of actually making up natural borders that aren't actually there. Now you start getting, and this has a huge psychological effect too, you start bringing in Mother Nature. Mother Nature is actually going to provide your borders, like Egypt. Egypt was bordered by the desert and by the Nile, these various things. Various peoples are the mountains. They live in the mountains. Now there are maybe states that cover those mountains, but I think in all like the United States, there are mountain people. Mountain people have a way about them. And we have mountain people in two different mountain ranges. We'll take one of them. Both the mountain ranges in the United States actually cover several states. So there's a way of life of mountain people that they identify with that's bigger than statehood. it's a rustic way of life. It has a lot of good things to it. I mean, bad things as well. But I mean, it's a way. I think it's a pretty good way actually. So that way, natural law has made that bubble. By living in the mountains themselves shape the people because it brings in natural pipelines of security. It also is a natural attraction. So mountains, or like 3 different rivers that create like a triangular landmass, natural law is kind of like making these little chunk sizes. That tends to be a way to bring people together. Remember that loose magnetic powers? That's a very large loose magnetic power that people who live, this is just look up history or sociology, or anthropology, anything. Humans, regardless of state borders, who live within a geological or geographical region, for their life, it has a psychological impact on them. They identify with being with that. The mountains, for example, have a isolating quality. Humans all over the planet, regardless of what country they're in, who live in the mountains, tend to have more of that way in their culture than other people do. One reason is it's kind of hard to not do that in the mountains. And 2, that attracts mojos or developments that find isolation appealing. So basically the mountain is doing a great job of branding itself. Natural law is the best brander out there. This is the 3 river land. That sounds good. I mean, natural law is a great salesperson. So they're pitching these things, and you can actually have the ability to see yourself in that way. And the reason I mention this is because Pod Layer is going to go that big. We're going to go beyond just stateside size. We're going to be all over the world, intangibly, on the internet and so forth. And we're going to have numbers that are even larger than we think would be like state. And it's important to know that the 4-minute mile, there's precedent, like Z, like legal precedent, there's precedent for this. Humans have, usually around natural geography and different things, they have been able to be of a like mind and operate in a we do it one way. Now obviously different mountain peoples have some differences. You can have your clan wars, obviously, very famous, things like that. But still there is a lot of precedent for people who live in swamps, mountains, deltas, deserts. They actually can have a way. I mean, like, if you take the desert peoples in Africa, there are tons of subcultures and substates. But there is a unifying culture to all desert dwellers. For example, they generally cannot stand people who waste water. That's a desert thing. That's a regional quality of those people. So humans have the ability to actually have a common, and that's not, I mean, obviously water is important, but not that important. I mean, it is, but like, it's that point of it's accentuated there. So it is a meme. That's a meme. The desert was a meme. You have people who live in the desert, and appreciation for the preciousness of water develops among all those people. Is that a good natural law thing to do? Yes. So natural law supports thousands upon thousands upon thousands and millions of people all being on the same page. If it's the Z has to be really good. Water preciousness. That's a good Z and Xi. In the desert, I think, in this case, so you see, I'm relating this to mojo and social alchemy. If you're dead on the natural law of money, you can just stack whatever you want. You can stack like a gazillion things on a razor's edge if it's perfectly balanced. Mathematically, that's possible. But you do have to be very more balanced as you get larger because it's easier to tip over. That does happen. It's easier to tip over as you get bigger. 19 is countries. Obviously, countries usually have a shared history of being isolated. It's kind of a continuation of the region metaphor, which is you may have like a region, say mountains here. That's a region. But beyond that, that mountain region may actually be a tremendous blocker for people on one side of the range to the other. So everyone, like for example, Eurasia. We generally call it Europe and Asia. It's one big block of land. But the way it's designed makes it really naturally easy for humans to separate between Europe and Asia. And because there was a large separation there, there is a different mindset, a meme mindset of Western and Eastern. Now, some of that's bad. but a lot's good. A lot of the Western mindset is good. A lot of the Eastern mindset is good. So the natural law parts of them are solid, and there's precedent. There's precedent of humans on a countrywide, I'll go and take the number 10, a continent-wide. For example, the continent of South America. A huge portion of them, enough to pretty much say like continent size, speak Spanish. Right? Larger than a state, larger than a region, larger than a country. Like about 80% or some large number of that whole continent actually is a Spanish-speaking people. And it allows them to do great things, art and commerce and communications of all kinds. So that was a winner. So if it's a Z, natural law, or Xi winner, you can go big. But you have to be on the Z's money. If you're on the money, you can just keep stacking. So now I'm going to go real quick before I go to Act 3, is that you can keep doing it again and turn it over. So it started with the first gradient was a single person. From gradient 20, it goes again to a 1, but it goes from continents to one planet. So the 21, or just 1, is now one planet Earth, and then you got Europa or Mars, and then Moon, and then space bases, and you then you go from actually taking over the whole planet as a bubble to the solar system, and then to the galaxy, and so on. Okay, short version of why it's important, it should be fairly obvious. All civilization and everything you've ever freaking known has come from a bubble of size 1 person to size however big we got so far. So there, why is it important? Because it's everything that's going on. As far as humans have control over. As far as humans concerned, human bubbles, that's it. That's as good as we can do. Yes, there's 2 strategies for doing this. You can actually go in with the 1 and then build out like this ambiently, or you can pull ambiently to bring in. And both strategies work very well. Obviously, for example, Niji is very puncture and pipeline, and then Niji is very demassification. The way we're doing this is the field work that we're training people to do out in the field, that's very puncture. Because you're going directly to make a personal one-on-one contact and turn over 1 win at a time, a direct 1-to-1 or more win. Demassification is the website. Our website is actually designed, and we're trying to put it out as much feelers to go global. So our website is to go global, and then come in with all the good talent people out there, and then locally, 1-to-1, find them and stack them together and try to meet up with the mass. That's the plan, and then we'll have everyone who's awesome together being awesome and breaking new awesome records.